The alien king gifted him a broken slave. He gave her back a future. The unwanted payment. Marcus Chen wiped the asteroid dust from his environmental suit as he stepped off the cargo transport onto Helix Station. The mining operation had taken 3 weeks in the most dangerous sector of the outer spiral, but he delivered exactly what Lord Keth Veltar had requested: rare crystalline formations that could power a small fleet, extracted from asteroids orbiting a dying star while dodging radiation bursts that could fry most ships in seconds. The station's artificial gravity felt heavy after weeks in 0G, and Marcus flexed his shoulders to work out the stiffness. Around him, the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and station workers went about their business in the main docking bay. The air recyclers hummed with their familiar mechanical rhythm, and the smell of ozone and metal filled his nostrils. Marcus had been working as a freelance salvage operator for 5 years now, ever since he'd left the Earth Colonial Navy. The work was dangerous, but it paid well, and it let him use the engineering skills he'd learned during his military service. Most importantly, it kept him away from the politics and bureaucracy that had driven him out of regular service. Lord Veltar's message had been waiting for him when he docked. The alien nobleman wanted to meet in his private quarters on the station's upper level, where the gravity was lighter and the air was mixed to accommodate different species' needs. Marcus made his way through the station's corridors, noting the mix of human and alien architecture that marked most frontier installations. The elevator ride to the upper levels gave him time to think about the job he'd just completed. 3 weeks of careful work, extracting crystals while avoiding the radiation storms that swept through the system every few hours. He'd lost 2 remote mining drones to particularly violent solar flares, but the haul had been worth it. The crystals alone should net him enough credits to upgrade his ship's shielding and maybe even replace the aging fusion reactor. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus found himself in a corridor lined with the flowing organic architecture favored by the Veltar species. Smooth walls curved into the ceiling, and soft bioluminescent panels provided gentle lighting. It was beautiful in its way, but Marcus always felt slightly uncomfortable in spaces designed for non-human proportions. Lord Veltar's quarters were at the end of the corridor, guarded by 2 alien security personnel whose species Marcus didn't recognize. They were tall and thin, with 4 arms each and skin that seemed to shift color slightly in the changing light. They scanned him with some kind of energy weapon, then stepped aside to let him pass. The door dilated open to reveal a spacious chamber with walls that seemed to flow like water. Lord Veltar sat on what Marcus assumed was furniture, though it looked more like a living sculpture that had grown from the floor. The alien nobleman was impressive even by his species' standards, nearly 3 meters tall with the characteristic blue-gray skin and elongated limbs of his people. His large, multifaceted eyes fixed on Marcus as he entered. "Ah, the human engineer," Veltar said, his voice carrying the musical tones typical of his species. "I trust the mining operation went according to plan?" Marcus nodded, pulling out a datapad to show the extraction reports. "Every crystal you requested plus a 20% overage. The radiation was worse than your initial scans indicated, but we managed to work around it." Veltar examined the data with apparent satisfaction, his long fingers dancing over the holographic display. "Excellent work. The crystals are already being loaded onto my ships. Your reputation for competence appears to be well-deserved." "About the payment," Marcus said, getting straight to business. "We agreed on 200,000 credits plus expenses." The alien's expression shifted in a way that Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement among Veltar's people. "Ah yes, payment. I'm afraid there's been a slight change in our arrangement." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd dealt with enough clients over the years to know when someone was about to try to cheat him. "A change? We had an agreement, Lord Veltar." "Indeed we did," the alien said, rising from his living furniture to his full height. "But I find myself temporarily short of liquid assets. The crystals you extracted are needed for a military operation that requires all my available funds. However, I have something else to offer you. Something potentially much more valuable." Before Marcus could object, Veltar touched a control panel embedded in the wall. A section of the far wall became transparent, revealing an adjacent chamber. Inside, Marcus could see a female of Veltar's species, though she was smaller and more delicately built than the Lord. She sat in what appeared to be some kind of mobility chair, her lower body supported by a sophisticated piece of technology that Marcus recognized as advanced medical equipment. "My daughter Zara," Veltar said, his tone shifting to something that might have been discussed. "She was injured in an accident several years ago. Her legs no longer function properly, making her unsuitable for marriage alliances or any useful role in society. She has become something of a burden to my household." Marcus stared through the transparent wall at the young alien woman. Even from a distance, he could see intelligence in her large, dark eyes as she worked on some kind of complex device at a workstation designed to accommodate her mobility chair. Her fingers moved with precision and speed as she manipulated holographic displays and microscopic components. "You're offering me your daughter as payment?" Marcus asked, unable to hide his shock. "Consider it a practical solution to both our problems," Veltar replied smoothly. "You need compensation for your work. I need to find some use for a daughter who can no longer fulfill her duties to our family. Perhaps you can find some value in her that has escaped me." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. During his time in the Navy, he'd worked with soldiers who had been injured in the line of duty. Some of the best engineers and tacticians he'd known had been people who had adapted to physical challenges in ways that made them more capable, not less. The idea of treating someone as disposable because of a disability went against everything he believed in. "She's a person, not property," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not interested in any arrangement that treats her like cargo to be traded." Veltar's expression shifted again, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been surprise. How curious. Most species understand the practical realities of such situations. "Very well. If you prefer, consider this a request to provide transportation and care for someone my family can no longer accommodate." Through the transparent wall, Marcus watched as Zara completed whatever she was working on. The device she'd been assembling suddenly came to life, projecting a complex three-dimensional model that rotated slowly in the air above her workstation. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that it was some kind of advanced technical schematic, far more sophisticated than anything he'd seen in years of military and civilian engineering work. "What does she do?" Marcus asked, his curiosity overcoming his anger at the situation. "She tinkers with broken things," Veltar said dismissively. "Mechanical devices, computer systems, that sort of thing. I suppose she finds it gives her something to occupy her time. None of it has any practical value, of course." Marcus watched as Zara made adjustments to her holographic model, her movements precise and confident. He'd seen enough engineers at work to recognize genuine expertise when he saw it. Whatever she was working on, it was far from simple tinkering. "I'd like to speak with her," Marcus said. Veltar seemed taken aback by the request. "Speak with her? I hardly see the point, but if you insist." He touched another control and the wall between the chambers became fully transparent. "Zara," he called out in a voice that carried clear irritation. "The human wishes to speak with you." Zara looked up from her work, and Marcus found himself meeting intelligent eyes that held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She touched a control on her mobility chair, and it glided smoothly across the chamber to bring her closer to the transparent barrier. "You're the salvage operator," she said, her voice carrying the same musical tones as her father's but somehow more pleasant to Marcus's ears. "I monitored the communication signals from your mining operation. Your technical solutions to the radiation interference were quite elegant." Marcus blinked in surprise. "You were monitoring my work?" "I monitor most technical operations in this sector," Zara replied matter-of-factly. "It helps me understand how different approaches to engineering problems work in practice. Your improvised shielding modifications were particularly interesting. Most operators would have simply retreated when the radiation levels increased." "Sometimes you have to adapt to get the job done," Marcus said, finding himself drawn into the conversation despite the strange circumstances. "Exactly," Zara said, and for the first time Marcus saw something like enthusiasm in her expression. "Adaptation is the key to solving problems that others consider impossible. For instance, when this happened, She gestured to her legs. Everyone assumed I would become useless. Instead, I discovered capabilities I never knew I had. She turned her mobility chair slightly, revealing the sophisticated control systems built into its armrests. I designed and built these interfaces myself. They allow me to interact with computer systems and manufacturing equipment in ways that most people find impossible. When you can't rely on conventional mobility, you learn to extend your capabilities in other directions. Marcus studied the technical readouts visible on her workstation displays. Even from his limited view, he could see system diagnostics and design schematics that were far beyond basic tinkering. "What kind of projects are you working on?" Zara glanced at her father, then back at Marcus. "Integration technologies. Ways to create seamless interfaces between different types of systems. Biological, mechanical, digital. Most people see boundaries between these things, but I see opportunities for connection." "Connection," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. In his years of engineering work, he'd learned that the most elegant solutions often came from seeing patterns that others missed. Looking at Zara's work setup and the way she moved through her environment, he was beginning to understand that she had developed approaches to problem-solving that were uniquely valuable. "This conversation is pointless," Beltar interrupted impatiently. "The simple facts remain. I cannot provide monetary payment, and she requires care that my household can no longer provide. Will you accept this arrangement or not?" Marcus looked at Zara, who met his gaze steadily. In her eyes, he saw something he recognized from his own experience in the military. The look of someone who had been written off by others but who knew their own worth. Someone who had turned adversity into capability. "I'll accept," Marcus said finally, "but not as payment for my services. Consider it a consulting arrangement. I provide transportation and support, and in exchange I learn about integration technologies that might be useful in my line of work." Zara's eyebrows rose in surprise, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been hope in her expression. "A consulting arrangement?" she asked. "That's right," Marcus said, making his decision. "I've seen enough of your work to know that what you're doing has real value. If you're interested in working with someone who recognizes that, then we might have something to discuss." Veltar looked confused by this turn of events, but he activated the controls that opened the barrier between the chambers. "Very well. If you insist on this interpretation of our arrangement, I will not object. Zara, gather whatever possessions you wish to take with you." As Zara began collecting data storage devices and portable equipment from her workstation, Marcus found himself wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. But watching the way she organized her materials with practiced efficiency, he felt confident that he'd made the right choice. In his experience, the best engineers were often the ones who had learned to see opportunities where others saw only problems. 20 minutes later, Marcus was helping Zara transfer her equipment to his ship, the Stellar Nomad, docked in the station's civilian bay. Her mobility chair interfaced smoothly with the ship's internal transport systems, and she moved through the corridors with an ease that suggested she was used to adapting to new environments. "Your ship has good bones," Zara observed as they entered the main engineering section. "These fusion reactors are older models, but they're reliable, and you've made some interesting modifications to the power distribution systems. Necessary adaptations," Marcus said, echoing her earlier words. "When you're working in dangerous sectors, you learn to make your equipment more capable." Zara smiled, and Marcus realized it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "I think," she said, "that this consulting arrangement might be mutually beneficial." The hidden genius, 3 days into their journey through the neutral zone, Marcus was beginning to understand that he had vastly underestimated Zara's capabilities. What he had initially taken for impressive technical skill was revealing itself to be something far more significant. She had spent the first day familiarizing herself with the Stellar Nomad systems, and by the second day, she was suggesting modifications that Marcus hadn't even considered possible. "Your navigation computer is fighting against your sensor array," Zara explained as she worked at a console in the ship's engineering bay. Her mobility chair had interfaced seamlessly with the ship's systems, allowing her to access diagnostic panels that would have required Marcus to crawl through maintenance shafts. They're both trying to process spatial data simultaneously, creating processing conflicts that slow down both systems. Marcus watched as she brought up a three-dimensional schematic of the ship's computer architecture. The display showed data flows as streams of light moving through a complex network of nodes and connections. Where most people would see a confusing tangle of information pathways, Zara seemed to see patterns and opportunities. "I never thought about it that way," Marcus admitted. "The systems were installed separately over the years. I just assumed they would work together automatically." "Most people do," Zara said, making subtle adjustments to the data routing protocols. "But computer systems, like people, don't naturally cooperate just because they're placed in proximity to each other. They need proper interfaces, communication protocols, ways to share information without competing for the same resources." As she spoke, the navigation display on the main console began updating more smoothly, and the sensor resolution improved noticeably. Marcus had been dealing with sluggish response times for months, assuming it was just normal wear on aging equipment. "How did you learn to see system interactions like this?" Marcus asked. Zara paused in her work, her expression becoming thoughtful. "When your body doesn't work the way it's supposed to, you become very aware of how different systems need to cooperate to achieve anything useful. My legs don't respond to my brain's signals the way they should, so I had to learn how to create new pathways for communication and control." She gestured to her mobility chair, and Marcus noticed for the first time the subtle complexity of its design. What he had initially seen as a simple assistive device was actually a sophisticated piece of technology, covered with sensors, interfaces, and control systems. "This chair doesn't just provide mobility," Zara continued. "It extends my nervous system, allowing me to interface directly with computer systems, manufacturing equipment, even ship controls. The accident that damaged my legs forced me to develop capabilities that most people never need." Marcus studied the technical readouts on her display. "You're talking about direct neural interfaces. That technology is still theoretical in most sectors." "Theoretical for people who think in terms of conventional solutions," Zara replied. "When conventional solutions aren't available, you learn to think differently. My father sees my condition as a limitation, but it actually freed me from assumptions about how things are supposed to work." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the ship's communication system. Marcus moved to the main console where a priority message was waiting. His stomach tightened as he read the sender identification. "Problem?" Zara asked, noticing his expression. "Your father," Marcus said grimly. "He sent a message to all ships in this sector, offering a substantial reward for our location and safe return." Zara's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Safe return? How thoughtful of him. I assume the reward is for returning me, not you." Marcus pulled up the full message on the main display. Lord Veltar had classified Zara as stolen property and was offering 50,000 credits for information leading to her recovery. The message made no mention of Marcus's well-being. "We need to change course," Marcus said, moving toward the navigation controls. "Head for the outer rim where his influence is weaker." "Wait," Zara said, her voice carrying a note of excitement that surprised him. "Before we run, let me show you something that might change your perspective on our situation." She activated a series of controls on her mobility chair, and suddenly the ship's main display filled with technical schematics, unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The designs showed integration systems that seemed to blend biological, mechanical, and digital components in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "For the past 3 years," Zara explained, "I've been developing adaptive interface technology, systems that can bridge the gap between different types of consciousness and different types of machinery, neural interfaces that work with any species, control systems that can adapt to any type of equipment." Marcus stared at the schematics, his engineering background allowing him to grasp some of the implications. "This could revolutionize everything. Space travel, manufacturing, even medical treatment." "Exactly," Zara said, "and my father dismissed it all as useless tinkering because he couldn't see past his prejudices about disability and conventional thinking." The ship's proximity alarms suddenly activated, indicating approaching vessels. Marcus quickly brought up the sensor display, revealing 3 ships on an intercept course. Their configuration matched the design of Lord Veltar's security forces. "They found us faster than expected," Marcus muttered, powering up the ship's defensive systems. "Let me help," Zara said, moving her chair to a secondary control station. "Your ship's evasion capabilities are limited by the same integration problems we discussed earlier. But if you'll trust me, I can optimize the system coordination in real time." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Do it." Zara's hands moved across her control interfaces with fluid precision. On the main display, Marcus watched as the ship's various systems began working together in ways he had never seen before. The engine synchronized with the navigation computer, which coordinated with the inertial dampeners and structural integrity systems. The result was a level of performance that should have been impossible for a ship of the Stellar Nomad's age and configuration. The pursuing ships opened fire just as Marcus initiated evasive maneuvers. But instead of the sluggish response he was used to, the Nomad moved like a much newer and more agile vessel. They slipped between the energy blasts with room to spare, and when Marcus engaged the ship's acceleration systems, they responded instantly. "How are you doing this?" Marcus asked as they left the pursuit ships behind. "I'm creating temporary neural pathways between the ship's systems," Zara explained, her concentration evident in her focused expression. "The same principles I use to interface with my mobility chair, but extended to encompass the entire vessel. The ship is responding to coordinated commands instead of competing individual instructions." They reached the edge of the star system and prepared to jump to hyperspace. The pursuing ships were falling further behind, unable to match their enhanced performance. But as they initiated the jump sequence, Marcus noticed something troubling on the long-range sensors. "More ships," he reported grimly. "At least 6 vessels waiting at the next junction point. Someone anticipated our route." Zara studied the sensor data, her expression becoming calculating. "They're using standard pursuit tactics, trying to force us into predictable escape routes. But what if we don't follow predictable patterns?" She brought up a star chart, showing their current position and the surrounding systems. Most of the potential routes were either controlled by Lord Veltar's allies or too dangerous for normal travel. "There," she said, pointing to a system marked with warning beacons. "The Maelstrom Nebula. It's classified as impassable due to electromagnetic storms and gravitational anomalies." Marcus shook his head. "No ship can navigate through there safely. The energy fields interfere with all standard navigation and communication systems." "Standard systems, yes," Zara agreed. "But what about non-standard approaches? My interface technology might be able to compensate for the interference by creating adaptive pathways through the storm." It was a desperate gamble, but Marcus realized they had few alternatives. The pursuit ships were closing in from multiple directions and conventional escape routes were being systematically blocked. "If we're going to try this," Marcus said, "we need to commit fully. Once we enter the nebula, there's no turning back." "I understand," Zara replied. "But consider the alternative. If they recapture me, my technology falls into my father's hands, and he'll use it to maintain the same power structures that treat people like property." Marcus looked at her, seeing not just the brilliant engineer he had come to respect, but someone who understood the broader implications of their situation. Her work represented more than just technical innovation. It was a challenge to the assumptions that allowed people like Lord Veltar to treat others as disposable. "Set course for the nebula," he decided. As the Stellar Nomad approached the swirling energy fields of the Maelstrom Nebula, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came with pushing beyond established limits. The ship's sensors began registering massive electromagnetic disturbances and gravitational fluctuations that would tear apart most vessels. "Initiating interface protocols now," Zara announced, her mobility chair connecting to multiple ship systems simultaneously. "I'm creating a neural network that encompasses navigation, structural integrity, and power distribution. The ship will need to respond as a single organism to survive the stresses inside the nebula." Marcus watched in fascination as the ship's systems began operating in perfect harmony. Instead of fighting against the chaotic energy fields of the nebula, They seemed to dance with them, finding paths through the storm that conventional navigation would never have detected. "It's working," he said, unable to hide his amazement. "More than working," Zara replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "The nebula's energy fields are actually enhancing the neural interface connections. It's as if the electromagnetic environment is providing additional processing power." They spent 6 hours navigating through the heart of the nebula, following energy currents and gravitational flows that created a safe passage through what most people considered impassable space. When they finally emerged on the far side, Marcus realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. "No one else knows this route exists," he said, looking back at the swirling energy fields behind them. "And no one else has the technology to follow it even if they did," Zara added. "My father's ships are trapped on the other side, unable to pursue us through conventional space." Marcus set course for the Outer Rim territories, where they could find temporary safety while deciding on their next move. But as they traveled through empty space, he found himself thinking about the broader implications of what they had accomplished. "Your interface technology," he said during their evening meal, "it doesn't just solve technical problems, it changes what's possible." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly right. Most limitations aren't inherent in the technology itself. They come from assumptions about how systems should interact, how problems should be approached, what kinds of solutions are acceptable. And those assumptions often reflect social biases," Marcus added, beginning to understand the full scope of what she was saying. "Precisely. My father dismissed my work because he couldn't imagine that someone with a disability could contribute anything valuable. But disability forces you to find alternative approaches, to see possibilities that others miss." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. If your technology became widely available, it would change how people think about capability itself. "Which is exactly why it's dangerous to people like my father," Zara replied. "Power structures based on exclusion and prejudice can't survive when the excluded demonstrate capabilities that surpass the included." As they continued toward the Outer Rim, Marcus realized that their journey had become about much more than escape. They were carrying technology that could challenge fundamental assumptions about what people could accomplish when given the opportunity to develop their unique capabilities. The Revolutionary Alliance. The hidden research facility on Kepler. Prime was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Built into a series of interconnected asteroid habitats, it housed scientists and engineers from dozens of different species, all working on projects that their home governments had deemed too dangerous or too revolutionary to support officially. Dr. Sarah Kim, the facility's director, was a compact woman with graying hair and intense brown eyes, who had spent 20 years developing integration technologies before being forced to leave Earth's Colonial Research Division. She listened intently as Zara demonstrated her neural interface systems, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed her own deep expertise. "The applications are extraordinary," Dr. Kim said after watching Zara seamlessly coordinate 3 different manufacturing systems simultaneously. "But the implications extend far beyond technical capabilities. This technology could fundamentally alter social structures throughout the galaxy." Marcus nodded, having reached the same conclusion during their journey to the facility. "Which explains why Lord Veltar is so determined to get her back. He recognizes the threat to his authority." "It's not just my father," Zara added, adjusting the neural interface headset that allowed her to communicate directly with the facility's computer systems. "I've been monitoring communications traffic since we arrived. Multiple factions are mobilizing, all claiming authority over me and my work." Dr. Kim pulled up a holographic display showing ship movements throughout the sector. The data was troubling. Lord Veltar's forces had been joined by ships from the Galactic Commerce Guild and the Purity Coalition, 3 different groups that normally competed with each other, but were now apparently unified in their desire to control Zara's technology. "They understand what we're looking at," Dr. Kim explained. "Technology that makes capability independent of biological configuration or social status. It threatens every existing power structure based on exclusion and hierarchy." Marcus studied the Tactical display. His military training automatically analyzing the strategic situation. The combined fleets represented overwhelming firepower, enough to destroy the research facility and everyone in it. But scattered throughout the display were smaller groups of ships marked with different symbols. "What are these other contacts?" Marcus asked, pointing to the dispersed vessels. "Independent operators, research vessels, colonies that have been marginalized by the major powers," Dr. Kim replied. "Word of Zara's work has spread through underground networks. People are coming here because they recognize what this technology could mean for their own situations." Over the following days, Marcus watched as the facility transformed into something resembling a military command center. Engineers and scientists who had spent years working in isolation were suddenly collaborating on projects that combined their expertise with Zara's integration technology. The results were remarkable. A team of disabled researchers from the Cygnus colonies demonstrated how Zara's neural interfaces allowed them to control complex manufacturing systems with unprecedented precision. Scientists who had been exiled from their home worlds for pursuing unconventional research were using her technology to create new forms of artificial intelligence that could adapt to any cultural or biological context. Most significantly, species that had been unable to cooperate due to fundamental differences in how they processed information were finding common ground through interface systems that translated not just language, but entire conceptual frameworks. "You've created more than just technology," Marcus told Zara as they watched a mixed group of humans and aliens working together to design new types of spacecraft. "You've created a way for different forms of consciousness to collaborate." Zara was monitoring dozens of research projects simultaneously through her neural interfaces, her ability to process multiple information streams allowing her to coordinate activities across the entire facility. "The technology was always just a tool," she replied. "What matters is how people choose to use it." Their peaceful collaboration was interrupted when the facility's defense systems detected the approaching combined fleet. Lord Veltar had brought over 50 warships, supported by vessels from his allied factions. Against them, the research facility could deploy perhaps a dozen converted civilian ships, operated by crews who had little combat experience. "We can't fight them directly," Marcus said during the emergency strategy meeting. "But we don't have to. All we need is enough time to transmit Zara's complete research data to every independent network in the galaxy. They'll jam our communications," Dr. Kim pointed out. "Standard transmission protocols won't penetrate their interference fields." "Standard protocols, no," Zara said thoughtfully. "But what about non-standard approaches? My integration technology creates connections that bypass conventional communication channels." She explained her idea to the assembled researchers and ship captains. By networking all their vessels together through her neural interface systems, they could create a distributed communication array that would be impossible to completely jam. Each ship would become a node in a network that could adapt to interference by routing information through alternative pathways. "It's never been attempted on this scale," Dr. Kim warned. "The processing requirements alone could overload your neural interfaces." "Then we'll distribute the load," Zara replied. "Every person in our network can contribute processing capacity. Instead of one consciousness controlling the system, we'll have hundreds working together." Marcus felt a mixture of admiration and concern as he watched Zara prepare for what would essentially be a technological gamble with their lives. She was proposing to create a collective consciousness spanning dozens of ships and hundreds of individuals, all coordinated through her integration technology. "What about the combat situation?" asked Commander Torres, a former military officer who now led the facility's small security force. "Even with perfect coordination, we're still outnumbered 5-1. Marcus studied the tactical displays, considering their options. Traditional space combat favored the side with more firepower and heavier armor, but Zara's technology offered possibilities that traditional tactics couldn't account for. "We don't fight them," he said finally. "We demonstrate something they can't understand or counter. We show them what cooperation looks like when it's not limited by conventional assumptions about what's possible." When Lord Veltar's fleet arrived in the Kepler system, They found the research facility's defenders arranged in a formation that made no tactical sense. The ships were dispersed in a loose sphere around the asteroid habitats, apparently offering no mutual support or coordinated defense. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Stellar Nomad, now serving as the command vessel for their improvised fleet. Beside him, Zara was connected to neural interfaces that linked her to every ship and every person in their network. Her consciousness had become the central hub of a collective intelligence that spanned the entire defensive formation. "Incoming transmission from Lord Veltar," reported the communications officer. The alien nobleman's image appeared on the main display, his expression combining arrogance with barely controlled anger. "I offer you one final opportunity for reason," he announced. "Return my daughter and surrender the stolen technology, and I will allow the rest of you to depart unharmed." Marcus activated the response channel. "Counteroffer, Lord Veltar. Leave this system immediately and we won't demonstrate capabilities that will make your fleet obsolete." Veltar's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "You have a handful of converted civilian vessels against a battle fleet. Your bravado is admirable but pointless." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Zara, would you like to show your father what you've accomplished?" Through the neural network, Zara's consciousness reached out to encompass not just their own ships, but the massive energy fields that permeated the Kepler system itself. The star's magnetic field, the gravitational interactions between planets, the cosmic radiation that filled interplanetary space, all became part of an integrated system under her influence. What happened next would be studied by military strategists for generations. The research facility's ships began moving in perfect coordination, not just with each other, but with the natural forces of the system itself. They used gravitational fields to accelerate beyond their normal capabilities, rode magnetic currents to change direction instantaneously, and channeled stellar radiation to power weapons that shouldn't have been possible with their equipment. Lord Veltar's fleet found itself fighting not just a group of ships but the entire star system. Their weapons were deflected by precisely controlled magnetic fields. Their movements were predicted and countered by a collective intelligence that processed information faster than any individual consciousness could comprehend. Their communications were jammed by interference patterns that adapted to every frequency they tried to use. But most remarkably, none of the attacking vessels were destroyed. Instead, they were systematically disabled through precise strikes that eliminated their weapons and engines while leaving their life support systems intact. The message was clear. This was not an attack, but a demonstration. Within 2 hours, Lord Veltar's entire fleet was drifting helplessly in space. There, crews unharmed but their ships powerless. The nobleman himself requested permission to come aboard the research facility, his previous arrogance replaced by something that might have been wonder. Marcus and Dr. Kim met him in the facility's main conference room, where Zara was still connected to the neural network that now encompassed the entire system. Her consciousness had expanded far beyond its original limits, but she remained fundamentally herself, still the brilliant engineer who had seen possibilities where others saw only problems. "How?" Lord Veltar asked simply, staring at his daughter with an expression Marcus had never seen on the alien's face before. "By recognizing that capability isn't limited by the form it takes," Zara replied gently. "You saw my disability as a weakness, but it taught me to think beyond conventional limitations. You saw other species as inferior, but they each had insights that enhanced our collective understanding. You saw technology as a tool for maintaining power, but it's actually most powerful when it's used to enable cooperation." Veltar was silent, for a long moment processing what he had witnessed. "The implications," he said finally, "will destabilize everything." "No," Dr. Kim interjected. "They'll create stability based on inclusion rather than exclusion, power structures built on cooperation rather than domination. That's why you're afraid of this technology. It doesn't just threaten your authority, it makes that kind of authority obsolete." Over the following weeks, as news of the demonstration spread throughout the galaxy, Marcus watched the beginning of what historians would later call the integration revolution. Zara's technology was transmitted freely to anyone who wanted to use it. But more importantly, Her approach to problem-solving began influencing how people thought about capability, cooperation, and potential. Disabled individuals who had been marginalized by their societies demonstrated remarkable abilities when given access to adaptive interfaces. Species that had been excluded from galactic politics because of their different communication methods found their voices through translation technologies that worked at the level of consciousness itself. Colonies and research groups that had been isolated by distance or politics formed networks that transcended traditional boundaries. Marcus found himself serving as a liaison between the growing integration movement and the established governments that were struggling to adapt to these changes. It was challenging work, requiring diplomatic skills he had never needed as a salvage operator, but he found it deeply satisfying. Any regrets? Zara asked him one evening as they watched the sunset from the observation deck of their new ship, a vessel designed specifically for integration network operations. Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had changed completely from that day when Lord Veltar had tried to pay him with what he considered a useless daughter. Instead of a simple salvage operator, he had become part of a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. "Only one," he said finally. "I regret that it took so long for someone to recognize what you were capable of." Zara smiled, her hand finding his as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. But someone did recognize it. Someone saw potential where others saw only problems. That's what made all the difference. Around them, their ship hummed with the activity of dozens of integrated systems working in perfect harmony. It was a sound that Marcus had learned to associate with hope, with the possibility that intelligence and capability could flourish regardless of the form they took. In the years that followed, the integration revolution would face challenges, setbacks and opposition from those who preferred the old ways of thinking about power and potential, but its foundation had been established by a human engineer who learned to see beyond surface appearances, and an alien scientist who refused to be limited by others' assumptions about her capabilities. Together, they had proven that the most profound changes often begin not with grand gestures or overwhelming force, but with the simple recognition that everyone deserves the chance to show what they can accomplish when given the opportunity to develop their unique gifts.